At this point, we've layered on as much cardboard as we had in the shed and out of the workshops and stuff. You really want to have like 5 or 6 layers. Now, ideally, we would spray this with water so that the layers of cardboard would be nice and tight, but the water's way up there. So I don't really want to drag a hose down, and it is kind of a wet season. Now, if you recall, what I did is I did cut this as level as we could, and you can see some of that corner remnants. When it rains, because the sheets are layered from the bottom up, so we start from the bottom of the slope and move our way up, the water will tend to run under the sheets. That'll give us enough moisture to really mat this cardboard down. But I'm gonna run over, I got a shovel out, that's what you're gonna need next, or a pitchfork, and I'm gonna drive over to the pile where we have a bunch of mulch and wood chips. It's kind of old material, and we're just simply gonna put our junk material here. Now, ideally, you want heavy carbon material like tree trimmings from a tree services company, wood chips that are not treated, and you just want mounds of it. In fact, you're gonna put so much wood chip on this pile that it's gonna be about 8 inches thick, and that weight of the wood chips itself will mat everything down. So we're building kind of a mattress of mulch. Now, another thing that's really good if you have a mattress of mulch is that you can actually inoculate these areas with mushrooms. So let's say you get about 8 inches of wood chips on this cardboard. That's gonna mat it all down. It's definitely gonna kill all the grass underneath. We're gonna put our seeds in there in rows, so we kind of have an idea of what comes up. And then we could inoculate the whole thing with a mushroom slurry, oyster mushrooms, chicken of the woods, some mushroom that's gonna tolerate a little bit of being out in the sun. Now, this whole area is in an enclosure. If it wasn't, we would want to put a fence around here so that the deer don't come and eat the small little trees that are coming up. So when the trees are about 1 inch, 2 inches tall, that's when we're going to pick them out and then put them into pots. And so if you layer in here about 8 inches of wood chips, like that's probably about 4 or 5 cubic yards, then you get your seedlings in it. Those seedlings are just going to pop right up out of that wood chip. You're not going to have a problem with that. Now, over time, you're just going to keep adding more wood chips, but you do not add any fertilizer. You do not add anything that is fertile in a sense. You could add layers of leaves, you could add layers of wood chips, you could add layers of sawdust, all kinds of carbonous material. You want a fungal dominated soil, so as it does break down, you want a fungal dominated soil, and that's why we use a oyster mushroom slurry or different types of mushrooms, and there's a number of links in the resource guide that tell you where to get those products. But essentially what we're going to do is we're just going to keep layering this mound. Now, I've purposely made this the size, it's about 12 by 12 or 10 by 10. I purposely made sure I had a space next to it that it was also 10 by 10. Now, why did I do that? Now, this is very important. If we have an 8-inch deep area here of wood chips, and it's growing little tiny seedlings in it, and as we're picking out the seedlings, we're putting them in pots and putting them over on this side here, there will be a point where we're going to still have seedlings sprouting. So it could take a year or two for the seedlings to sprout like this, because we're not necessarily stratifying them, and we're not necessarily, it's kind of a natural process. Well, as the potted plants come out, we're going to end up with an area over here, and to reduce our amount of weeding, we could actually layer this area with cardboard, and I'll include a link to the video where I did this in my backyard in narrow tree nurseries, is that essentially each year you're going to layer out cardboard and then layer on top of that new wood chips. And those new wood chips, 6 inches, 8 inches, 10 inches, are going to basically create another mat. So what we'll end up with is a nice mat here that's maybe got 2 or 3 years of aging, multiple layers. And this area over here is going to be new, same thing. But there will be a point where one of these beds will have mature soil, because again, the microbes, the worms, the mushrooms that we put in there is going to break down all that wood, and we're going to end up with maybe 8 to 10 inch deep mulch, because we keep layering more materials on it. Those materials rot down. Layer more materials, they rot down. The plants, we picking the plants out of them. Then there's a point where we can just dig up this area and use that material in pots to pot up additional trees. We're essentially slow composting a highly fungal compost that's ideal for plants, but we're keeping the mulch and wood chips so thick, so deep and thick, that we never really have to worry about picking weeds. And anything we do pick out of here that does grow is going to be intentional. Again, we put those seeds down in rows, And you'll see later those sticks, we're going to put those in the top to kind of guide our rows. But what will happen is we'll just keep picking plants out. Now, if you have volunteers, like right here, there's some blackberries. And now this is going to get very acidic because, again, we have wood chips, just wood chips, no nutrients, just wood chips. But it'll be acidic enough that the small plants won't grow. But you could get, another reason I select this area because the soil's already acidic. But you're basically going to end up with some volunteer plants. Those would also get dug out. And we have over here as well more volunteers. These aren't a very particularly good blackberry, but it is native. So we may want to dig some of this up and put it with our blackberry patch or berry patch. But what you're going to end up with is this giant, thick mat, like a big, giant, fatty mattress full of soil, nutrients. Think about this. As you pot these plants up, you're going to have to put a little bit of time-release fertilizer in them when they're smaller trees, about a knee high. Well, all that fertilizer that leaks through is going to go into these beds. You're going to have leaf decay. You're going to have, you might pour grass on here, for example. But again, it's just layers and layers of mulch in order to prevent having to do a lot of weeding. But again, you may have this little corner right here. Looks like I could put some more flowers in here. You might have the woody stems off of a lot of these flowers. Now, if you don't have a flail mower, we're going to flail mower it and just put that wood back on the surface as mulch. But if you didn't have a flail mower and you cut off all these woody stems and things, you could layer those onto the beds here. You can also run these patches. See, if I just made a bunch of patches, I may not have enough mulch or may not have enough cardboard. But if every year you put in another 10 by 10 patch and you're getting enough wood chips to put maybe 4-inch layers on all these patches, you're going to end up with a significant amount of space that's a really nice tree nursery. Now, what if you have this tree nursery and the nuts didn't do very well? Okay, so you got maybe 2 years of putting nuts into these wood chips. You got a nice 10-inch thick mat of wood chips on the ground, but you know what? You're not getting a whole lot of trees to come out. What do? Well, let's say you got a couple hogs. Okay, you put a little fence around here. Put a hog in here for a little while. Let the hog eat all the nuts out. Most of the nuts are going to rot, but they're going to root everything all up. And then you've got a big, thick layer of soil that you can shovel out and put into the garden area. So if you decide to stop raising trees. Now, the system that we're showing here for raising native species of trees is so easy, it's almost recreational, that you probably won't stop doing this. So for example, we're collecting nuts, we're going and visiting parks, we're visiting property, we're hiking, and we're just collecting all the nuts and seeds that we can find. And then you're layering those nuts and seeds into a bed with wood chips, and whatever sprouts, you're going to take out and pot up. Then as they pot up, you're going to end up with you're going to go straight from a seedling into a large 3-gallon pot. Okay, we're not going to keep potting things up. Now, of course, if you had some nursery starts that you were starting out here, you could do that. But again, simple makes it work. You take those nuts, they sprout, you get the tree to a certain height, maybe about knee high, and then you start putting that slow release fertilizer in it to get it picked up, which could be chicken. It could be a composted chicken manure. You could top dress the pots with compost. The key is you don't want those pots to get a lot of plants growing in them, which will happen, but you don't want a lot of that. Then as the plant gets to a certain size, you then grow it out in your food forest, in your orchard area, to line the roads. I think what looks really nice lining your main roads is pollarded willow trees or pollarded locust trees. You might take some of these trees out of here and just use them to border an area to give you kind of a little bit better street appeal. But when the nuts drop from those trees, you rake them up and throw them in with the chickens or throw them in with the hogs. Or you might run goats under one of these little food forests so that they can temporarily eat down the area and reduce the amount of waste in the area. Actually, this little area right here, we could have impacted goats in it to let them crush it and just chew everything that's here. The key is that each of these beds is a multi-stacked function. It's weed barrier so that we don't have to pull weeds. It is slow compost. It is tree starts. It's later topsoil. And then even after that, you've got the trees. Can you see how this is so functional? Can you see how this takes your tree nursery to the next level? And of course, with the proper access, we can simply have a dump truck come in here with wood chips, dump the wood chips feet away from our area that we're going to work with. Actually, the dump truck could dump it up top there, and then we could just take it downhill. You always want to take your materials downhill. And then when we end up with 2 or 3 areas here, we'll be good to grow. Now, another thing in the design that's very useful, because you don't have to start with this much area. You could start 4 by 4. You could start 8 by 8, 10 by 10, anything. But one of the design features here too is that I put this right next to an access point. So let's say we dump wood chips in the access point area, in the access area. Then those wood chips get put onto here. Some of those chips are going to just basically be the path. You just rake it level in the path. Now you have a nice, easy path. If you have a golf cart or a gator or some kind of UTV, you can actually just drive right up to the tree nursery. Because remember, when these trees get bigger, they get heavier. And so you got to be able to get them out of here easy. I just used the truck. So I got the truck. I pulled the truck down here. I can slide the plants in the back, drive it to the top of the hill. Not a big deal. But again, can you see all the function in there? Now, I might not weed barrier the trail, the path here. That might not be necessary. But I can certainly get another one of these sections. So you have to have enough space that whatever size your original area is, you could double it. But again, there's nothing wrong with quadrupling it or multiplying it, or eventually having an area this big that is wood chips and small trees. That's a very scalable method. But while this area is maturing, there's pots going down over here, and under those pots is rows of cardboard. We could do 4 foot at a time. You know, we could do a row of cardboard, put some wood chips on top of it, put our pots with our trees in it, and then next year we go one more area over. And so we're almost going from seed to seedling to our small tree. And then from there, we could take it off and go plant it out in the field, go plant it out in the orchard. Now, another thing to remember here too is that we're not necessarily selling these trees. You don't need a nursery license if you're not selling the trees. These are for on-farm use. Again, it doesn't matter if you have an acre, 5 acres, or 50 acres. You want to grow as many trees as possible. You want to be able to harvest those trees easily. So 8 inches, 12 inches of wood chips. That root is not going to be down in the ground. You can pop that seedling out, put it in a pot, grow it out to a certain size, and then go take a post hole digger or dig a hole and plant that tree. We're also being able to bring in large amounts of biomass material that has no street value, but of course we're again stacking the function and therefore getting multiple uses out of the material. So what you'll end up with is a nursery bed here that slowly expands to various size trees. I will, if you're seeing this in the tutorial, I will have some pictures of what the different trees will look like. There's quite a few up there. At that point, you may need a shade cloth because it really depends on your trees. Some small trees, you don't want them to scald, especially if they're in a if you're in a plastic pot. The plastic pot can overheat. You may want to have water down here because when it's the hot season, you want to be able to water these plants. But again, we've got access and we've got water upslope. You can see there's a sprinkler right there. So when this field is full of vegetables, that sprinkler will probably be over here in the path, keeping our nursery area moist. Now, there's a couple other things we can do with shade cloths and different things to kind of keep that sun impact down. But ultimately, we're going to pack these trees so tight that they'll kind of shade each other. And then we just mainly need to make sure that they have some base nutrients once they get a little bit bigger, and that those nutrients are captured somewhere so that we're not losing that particular material. And then, of course, if this is 12 inches deep, 15 inches deep, it's a little hard to walk on. So you might decide to put a couple boards down. So this is just junk wood that was, it's pretty rotten. But you might throw a couple boards down to walk across the boards because the ground will be nice and soft and moist. And we want that because we're going to be digging trees out. We'll be putting new seeds in. We'll be transplanting plants. And then once the plants are big enough to go out in the field, they'll get out ready. And again, too, some cover crop here, some sun hemp. Again, when we flail mow this type of stuff or we get additional mulch, any excess mulch here, let's say it rots down pretty good, any of that excess mulch can be scraped off before the new layer of clean carbonous material comes back in. Again, we don't want to have animal manures here. We want these seeds to start naturally and strong, as if they fell in the woods somewhere. but we want to create conditions that are most ideal so that we have a strong seedling to get our nice little plant going. Now you can do this with apple seeds if you want to get tree rootstock for grafting. You can do this with nitrogen fixing trees. You can do this with a lot of different trees. But again, if that mulch is not deep and you do a black locust in here and you don't dig it up the first year, then you're going to end up with more and more trees here, and it's going to be harder and harder to get them out of the ground. So again, there is a method to the madness. The method stacks function. Ultimately, it gives us a large area in which we can nursery out trees. We'll probably get 500 trees out of this place over the course of a year. Now, some of them are only going to be a foot tall, and they'll have to grow out for a year or two before they're big. But we'll be at a point where we can stack the taller trees on the side where the sun is, and so that we can shade the smaller trees. That way, we might have to build a little cover over this so that we can have some shade cloth, or even just a wall on this side so we get shade from the sun, so we only have the evening sun on it. But again, we want ease of function, we want stacking of function, we want water management, nutrient management, and ultimately nature will take care of the rest. Nature will get us hundreds of trees. In my little backyard nursery that I've got, I've put out 50 or 100 trees in a year easily. Most of them are nitrogen fixing trees because that's what we backfill, or when we're prepping an area for orchard, nitrogen fixing trees tend to be the go-to. But this is it. I'm Justin Hitt from Prosperity Homestead. I'm gonna go get some wood chips. I was taking a break. I'm gonna go get some mulch. You got to make sure the mulch is as carbonous as possible. But when you get started, just use whatever you got, because if we don't put something over this cardboard, it will get blown away. So let me get started with that. If you have any questions about this or anything else we cover, visit www.prosperityhomestead.org. This is part of a larger course about your own backyard tree nursery and how to get an unlimited supply of trees for your small farm, homestead, or an estate. Click the link below to join our mailing list to make sure you get information about that program. And of course, if you have any questions, you can contact us through the contact page and we will be happy to answer it. Prosperity Homestead helps homeowners get more from their small farm, homestead, or estate. And in fact, so much that they have a prosperous living environment. Thanks for listening.